welcome to 2012. What do you think? I am so happy to be here this morning. We didn't have services on Christmas Day or New Year's Day, so we haven't had a service since December 18th, and I missed it.
Me too.
It was kind of nice to sleep in on this a couple of Sunday mornings in a row, but I really missed being here. Thank you, Trav Williams, our flautist, who comes here on the second Sunday of every month and shares with us his beautiful gifts. And welcome to Gerald Rivers, our guest speaker today. Gerald's come all the way down from Los Angeles, and he's got a wonderful workshop here this afternoon that I hope after you have a chance to get to know him a little bit, you'll be inclined to come and join us. Gerald does a very special thing. We all are intuitive, and we all have psychic abilities. And we all channel from time to time, even though we may or may not realize it. But sometimes when we can do it with purposeful intent and with a very divine, significant, individual energy, and we share ourselves to be of service, then something very special happens. And Gerald does that. And I'm sure that you channel other beautiful energies aside from, but you're more well known for channeling Dr. Martin Luther King. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to hear from Gerald later, but first I'd like to share my message with you. And unless you had something you wanted to say as a quick opening?
I'm just grateful to be here. Thank you.
I mic'd him up. He's not used to having a mic. So this is the first of the year, and it's a special year because it's 2012. Just in the last week, I've already noticed the shift in the energies. Have you all noticed that something amazing is happening? And the veil is getting thinner and thinner as we decloak from the things that we know to no longer be true. And the world seems to be a more magical place. And things seem to be happening in ways that are just absolutely fun and exciting. And one of the things that I wanted to share with you this morning, most significantly, is I'd like you to start this year out with a clean slate on something. I wrote an article in the magazine, for those of you that may or may not have already read it. It's called Issuing the World a Cancellation of Debt. For those of you that know my background, I'm a CPA, although my license is no longer active, and my husband Avalon here runs the family business, our CPA firm in Irvine. And being a set of working parents, we would work together, we would come home together, and discussions of work and personal life sort of flowed back in between the office, and we talked personal at work and work at home, and our 4 kids would roll their eyes as at the dinner table as they would hear us talking about April 15th deadlines and payroll tax returns and this. And they have all of these cognitive phrases that they can recite as they jokingly say they grew up with 2 CPAs, and of course they had budgets and allowances and things like that. It was not very structured. And I think it must be worse than having a principal or a doctor for a parent, but we used to use a lot of accounting terminology to make jokes or make points, and the kids didn't think it was funny, but we did. So, how many of you at the end of the year, you get some interest income if you are clever enough to have some good savings, and you get at the end of the year a form called a 1099-B from your bank, which means you've got reportable interest income, right? And if you worked as an independent consultant, you might get a 1099 MISC, 1099 miscellaneous. And if you went to Las Vegas and got really lucky and had some gambling winnings, you get a 1099G. Anybody ever get a 1099G? Oh, you did? Oh, you? That's funny. If you have ever closed a credit card and having them written off a balance, or if a bank has discharged a loan against you and you don't have to pay it, it's called a forgiveness of indebtedness or a cancellation of debt. And if you do this and you aren't under protection of bankruptcy, this bank or this credit card will issue what's called a 1099-C, a cancellation of debt. And it means you are forgiven. You no longer owe them anything. So I'd like to propose to you, as individuals, as people, to issue 1099-Cs to anybody that you think owes you anything. Who owes you something? Do your children owe you respect? Does your spouse owe you some time? Does an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend owe you a CD they took when they moved out? Does a friend owe you money? Does a client owe you some debt against a service that you've provided? Does a spouse owe you some time that they haven't given you, an extra vacation that they promised you? Do your parents or your siblings owe you some respect and approval that you haven't gotten? Does society owe you a debt? Do you feel like society is indebted to you because you're too short or too tall or too old or too young, or you're the wrong color or the wrong sex, or came from the wrong side of tracks, or for whatever reason because you are overeducated or undereducated? Does society owe you something? Does your religion owe you something? Do you think God owes you something? When you engage in a thought process that somebody or something owed you something, you have bought into a concept of not being able to create everything from your own heart space that you need. You've agreed to an idea that you cannot create everything that you need from your own heart space, and that you are unworthy in the eyes of the universe to manifest peace, happiness, love, joy, completeness, connectedness, community, friendship. You've denied yourself the ability to create everything that you need when you decide that there's something that you want or need that somebody else has and they've got it hostage. You've given away your power. So who owes you something? Go through and do an inventory. I want you to close your eyes right now. Just put one of your hands on your heart, whichever one jumps up first, whether it's your receiving hand or your giving hand, whichever one jumps up first. I want you to go through and just kind of think about when you were young, as you go through your life, as you were a child and you went through school, maybe you went through college, as you started working. And I want you to do a quick inventory of all the people that you think owe you something. That they were supposed to give something to you that they didn't give you. And even if you have the most loving parents in the world, there's always I had great parents, but I didn't get this. You start thinking if there's a list of things that you can come up with. Parents, sisters, children, grandparents, neighbors, teachers, professors, employers, your local grocery store clerk, your local bank clerk, anybody that you interact with, that you think in some way, in some capacity, hasn't given you what you want or deserve. And as you picture these people, see your hand go from your heart energetically out to them and offer them a return of that debt. And hear yourself saying, I give this back to you. I forgive you this debt. And as I forgive you this debt, I recognize and affirm that I have the power to create in my own heart space anything that I think it was that I held you accountable for giving me. And I recognize now it was never in your hands, that it was always in my own heart to create this. And I ask you to forgive me for holding you accountable for something that was not in your power to give me. And I send you from my heart space love and light. And I recognize now that I have everything I need to create the life of my dreams right nourishes me, nurtures me, guides me, listens to everything I say, and every thought that I have, and every wish of my heart. And I have only to be open to receive all of my desires as I allow the universe to give them to me. And I listen to the guidance of my angels and my spirit guides and my deceased loved ones and the archangels, the ascended masters, my starseed family, and any other highly evolved being out there who inspires us. Do we listen to guidance to help give us what it is that we need to release all of those ideas and beliefs that keep us from understanding at the highest level that we manifest everything in our lives. And this is a good thing. Take as long as you need, and whenever you finish inventorying and going through your list, and you don't have to do it all now, you can go home and do this later on this evening. Issue all of them a 1099-C, a cancellation of debt. Give them back the freedom to come into your space without you looking at them and thinking that they've done something to short you in any way. Anybody have a horrifically long list? It's easy, isn't it? It's easy to get caught in the trap of thinking that the source of our happiness is outside of us and not within us as we commune with Spirit. So withhold, isn't it? Go to school, have this, get married, have kids, that's what'll make you happy. How could you be happy if you don't have all of these? I mean, this is part of our culture. It's part of so many of the things that are presented to us in family, friends, and media, the social examples. The happiness is something that you seek. But it really isn't, is it? It's something that you decide that you have. And in deciding that you have it, then so it is. You can decide to be happy right now, right here, in this moment, without anything in your life changing whatsoever, aside from your decision to be happy. And then as the Dalai Lama says, if you want more happiness, be happy for somebody else. And then you've got 1,000 times more happiness in your life. You can only be happy about so many things in your own life, but you can be happy for all the people who woke up today and breathed air and had somebody in their home to talk to and touch, had a cat or a dog to cuddle with them, had a car to drive to go to the grocery store and had money in their bank to buy it, whatever they needed. There's so many things that we can be happy for other people for. You could be overwhelmed with happiness if you just go through and think about all the different ways and people that you can see happiness for. What do you think? And you file your 1099 not with the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, but with the Individual Resources Self-Sufficiency. Because that's where it comes from. It's all in here. So how's that for electronic parlay? Forgive me. So welcome to the Temple of Light. This is my joy and my calling to create this space. And we have so many wonderful events here and so many things happening. And having a guest speaker at our Sunday services is one of my favorite things that we do. And we invite all of these amazing people, and Spirit just seems to send us the most amazing people each week, don't they? Those who come on a regular basis, we just get this amazing myriad of people. So I'd like to share now, and this is Gerald C. Rivers, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to do this amazing thing. Usually people have the most incredible story as to hit in the back of a 2x4 and all of a sudden something happens.
I never think of my own story as being particularly incredible, although there are many who would disagree. For the longest time doing this work, I would not share my personal story. I would just go up and do Martin Luther King, allow these things to come through me. I'm an actor by training and by trade, and I grew up in Compton in the 1980s when the introduction of crack cocaine and automatic weapons was a daily part of our existence growing up there. And at about age 16, I was involved in gang violence, and you can use your imagination. That's what we were doing. And at that time in my life, I thought every 16-year-old on the planet was in a gang and did things that were less than noble. I really did. My world was so small. Compton is literally 5 miles wide and 7 miles long. And for much of the time that I lived there, I never went outside of that particular arena. At about 16, my best friend, if you will, I have not had a quote-unquote best friend since then, was murdered in his front yard. And I don't say that with any kind of callousness, because it was significant in my life. The only thing that prevented me from standing next to him on that day was the fact that I had a flat tire on my 10-speed bike. And back then, I can look at this crowd, and you guys remember when you would have to repair the tire on a bike with the rubber cement, and you had a match, and you had a little scratcher, and you would burn it, and it would bubble up and heal the wound on this particular inner tube so you could get in your bike and ride. And I'd done this, I won't say 1,000 times, but many times. And for whatever reason, this day, every time I seemed to repair one hole, I would discover another one that was in this inner tube. So I didn't make it to his house. And that night, I called and they said he's not here. And as the night progressed, no one was answering his phone. This was before we had cell phones. And they didn't even have an answering machine. If they weren't home, nobody answered the phone. It just didn't happen. The next morning, I called first thing and said, I think I got it figured out. I'm going to head over there now. And his brother answered the phone and said, Deshaun Green is his name. He said, he died last night. And I was devastated, to put it mildly. I didn't have great relationships to begin with, but to take the one person that had been in my life since we were in kindergarten and just have him sort of gone was a lot for me to deal with. At that point, I had not really attended class in high school. I was enrolled. But I don't remember much about what took place in the classrooms there. That was one of the events that was Spirit, I now know, trying to get my attention. Say, hey, I'm talking to you. Pay attention. But even then, I was angry, I was frustrated, I was confused. It wasn't enough for me to stop and change the course that I was on, because in that thinking, there had to be retaliation. You had to do something about it. You had to get those guys back. You can't let them get away with that. So in the midst of meeting with these guys, sort of deciding what we were going to do, my father, who I didn't have a great relationship with, was involved in a severe automobile accident. He had gone to pick his mother-in-law from the airport, and on the way back, there was a high-speed police chase, and it affected laws in California. That's why they don't have high speed anymore. They'll follow them slowly and go behind them. This was one of the actual cases that affected changing the laws in California. because what happened was someone ran a red light and there was a 9-car pileup. My dad was in the car and he was with his fiancée, and her mom had just retired from teaching in Texas and was moving to California. And they literally were picking her up from the airport, taking her to the new place where she would live, and they were struck broadside and she was killed instantly. And his fiancée at the time suffered brain damage, and my dad was in the backseat of the car asleep. Being asleep really saved his life because he was so relaxed that he sort of went with whatever went on, but it left him paralyzed, quadriplegic to this day. That was enough to get my attention. When I went to the hospital to visit my father, he was in full body traction. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that, but you're not touching the actual bed or gurney at all. You're lifted several inches off the bed, and every part of your body is literally floating, in essence, being carried in a weightless sense. And there was a crown, it's the only way I can describe it, that had screws that literally went into the skull to hold all of this stuff in place. And I went home, and I looked in the mirror, and I looked at myself in this mirror, and I began shaking violently, and I began crying and convulsing, and it was a unique experience for me because it was the beginning of what was ultimately a transformation for me. So now I'm starting what should be my senior year in high school. According to my grades and my credits, I was a freshman because I had never gone, and the teachers didn't even know who I was. And so I was divinely led to go to the counselor and say, I would like to graduate on time, and what is it that I need to do that? And she said, you can't. She said, it's impossible. There's no way that you're going to be able to, in 1 year, make up these credits from the last 3 years. This is how Spirit works, though. It said, don't pay attention to the circumstances. It doesn't matter what other people say. It doesn't matter their opinion. There is a truth that exists. So I said, there's got to be a way. And she said, well, I'm going to challenge you. You will have to go to school from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3:30 in the afternoon. And then you'll have to return and go from 3:30 until 6 for an after-school program. Then you'll have to return and go from 6:30 until 9 with the adult schools if you intend to graduate on time. And I did it. And graduated not only on time, but with a scholarship and honors. So the scholarship was given to me from a small organization in town that wanted to help kids who lived in Compton who were going to school outside of the district. So it was this unique scholarship, and I was the only one at my high school who really qualified for this particular scholarship. And they came to me and they said, we know you've been a troublemaker, but we're going to pay for you to go to college anywhere you want to go for as long as you want to go. All you have to do is decide to go. So I said, okay, I'll buy that for a nickel, and we'll see what happens. Part of me was still not believing, not trusting, not knowing, but really walking out on faith and walking by faith and not by sight, because what I could see were a set of circumstances that were beyond my ability to overcome. But there was a greater power at work. By the time I got to the end of my senior year, I had joined the speech team, which was another. The counselor says, you don't have time for extracurricular activity. Why are you taking a speech class? And I said, because I like it, and because that's something I want to do. And when I enrolled in the speech class and joined the team, the speech teacher came to me, and she said, you've taken my class before, and I failed you because you either didn't show up or you refused to get up and do the speech in class. She said, I tell you what, I know your situation. If you go to one tournament and compete, I'll pass you in my class. No matter what else happens, if you just go, prepare a speech, and compete, you don't even have to win, you can pass my class. Of course, I went, and I won the whole thing. And then I qualified for the state championship qualifier, blah, 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 and did extremely well there as well. So before I graduated, someone had heard that I was a public speaker. and they said, there's a show we want you to see called Voices of America. I went to see the show, and I thought, this is great. I think I want to do this. I auditioned, I got in the show, I could sing, I could dance. I had taken classes in acting before, and I did some less than noble things to pay for my acting classes. But I got the classes sort of under my belt. So I saw this show, and they were getting ready to go on the road. And they said, you will be a chorus member. You can sing, you can dance, but there's no particular lines for you in the show. There was an actor in the show who was playing Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass and some other classic American historical figure. And I would say I decided, but the truth is I think it was decided for me that I was to take one of those roles. And without question or hesitation, I said, I'll do Martin Luther King. And I literally learned one paragraph from the I Have a Dream speech. But I really did my homework. I did the character study. I listened to the tapes. I saw the videos. I had the record album. I read some books. And I went to the producer right before we went on tour and said, I have something I have to show you. And he said, okay. And he took me in the back. And I did this piece of the speech, and I'll never forget, he came out and he said, change the program! Change the program! We have a new Martin Luther King. So I got in the show, and I went on tour, and then my mom was absolutely amazed. She said, how do you go from being on probation and being in trouble to being in New York, a professional musical theater piece? I said, I auditioned and I got in. She says, well, what did you do in the show? I said, I played Martin Luther King. So she said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come back to my church, and I want you to do whatever you did in the show at church. I agreed to do it, and the rest is proverbial history, because that day at church, the librarian from the city of Compton was in service. She said, you did such a fantastic job. I want you to come to the library and speak. So I went to the library, and that day there were a group of scouts there. And the scoutmaster said, I want you to come to the Boy Scouts of America in this local region and do. So then I was at churches, and I was at schools, and it started to expand, and I thought, well, I've got to expand my repertoire. I've got to be able to do more than one paragraph from the I Have a Dream speech. So I started listening, and that's profound. I started listening. I really started listening. I started listening to these speeches over and over again, thinking, sometimes the thinking gets in the way, but thinking that I was just going to learn more words to say. Never in my wildest dreams had I imagined that I was being taught, that I was being transformed, that I was changing who I was in the process. But I'll tell you, if you listen long enough, there is no way you cannot be changed. Sometimes we turn the hearing off and we decide, I don't want to listen to that anymore. But if you just keep listening, and I know I go to church at Agape in Culver City, and they describe it as that still small voice. If you just keep listening, more and more and more truth, of what I can only describe as eternal truth, comes through. So now I've got a wide range of speeches that I can do. And initially I thought I was just doing the speeches, and then I decided I wanted to follow in Martin Luther King's footsteps. I wanted to go somewhere where he had been. I wanted to do something that he had done. So I went to school at Morehouse College. More and more miracles. That's where Martin Luther King went to school. On the scholarship, I went to school at LA City College because they had a theater program, and they had a speech team. And I joined the speech team and won national awards and accolades there. And again, these people began to look and say, how do you go from your pants sagging and a bandana hanging out of your pocket, and my hair was permed then, dark and lovely, if that means anything. So at 17, I graduated when I was 17 years old. At 17 years old, I've got this perm, and I'm going to LA City College, and I joined the speech team. And the speech team was almost non-existent. So they said, it's you and 3 other people. This small team goes on to win national awards and accolades. And then they have a talent show at the school. And what do? Martin Luther King. That led to me being elected the student body president at Los Angeles City College, making me the youngest student body president in the history of that institution. And again, I keep looking, I call it collapsing time. I keep looking back at myself, looking forward at myself, looking back at myself, and I could see then that there was a life that was different than the one that I was living. As I can see now, I can look back and see that that was a life that's different than the one that I'm living right now. And the fact that I was sort of having this conversation with myself, if you will. When I speak in the prisons, I talk about throwing a pass to yourself. So you can literally launch something into your own future, and you can be the person who receives it on the other end. You've just got to toss it out there. You've just got to put it out there, and you literally, sometimes somebody else gets it, and that's okay too. But sometimes you get to receive what you set for yourself in motion, and I'm living proof that I had the opportunity to have that experience. Now I'm at Morehouse College. Next thing I know, I'm on tour. I'm off Broadway. And my folks, my family, I was the first one to go to college. I was the first one to graduate high school. I was the first one to sort of leave the hood, if you will. And I really had no desire to go back. And then as I got older, it became really important to me that I go back. That I go back and talk to young people. One of the conditions of my probation was that I speak to young people. And I was on probation long after I was gone, because they were like, we got to keep an eye on you. And when it was time to go on tour, I had to go to my probation officer and say, may I leave the state of California? And she said, I don't know. We're going to put you in front of a judge. And so part of me is really resentful, like, I've done all the work now. Why would you do that to me? But in front of the judge, I couldn't fake it. I had to be somebody different than the person that judge had seen before. And they tricked me, because by working with young people, the truth I spoke to them began to echo and resonate in my own life. And so then I had I don't want to get into all of the details, but I had an experience where I met a woman in Orange County. I'm going to share some intimate details with you guys now. She lived in Newport Beach on Balboa Island. She was about 10 years older than I am. And we got together, and we had a baby. And she decided that I was not mature enough, serious enough, worthy enough, rich enough, white enough to raise that child. So she gave this child up for adoption. I say she did it, but I participated. I was there. I agreed with her. I didn't feel like I was worthy. I didn't feel like I could do a very good job. And then for the next 20 years, I held this resentment and lack of forgiveness for myself for giving my firstborn son up for adoption at birth. However, one time I'm on tour and somebody presents something known as the I Ching to me, which I had never seen before. They said, you ask it a question, and we guarantee it will provide you with an honest and truthful answer. And I said, will I ever get to see my son again? And the symbols represented reunion and reunification. And I remember going into the bathtub of this hotel where we were on tour and just sobbing mercilessly. And then I began to believe that that too was possible. I didn't pay attention to the statistics, because the statistics say that children who are given up for adoption may look for their mother. They rarely look for their father. And if they do, they just want to look at them to say, I just needed to know where I came from, and thank you very much. About 5 years ago, my firstborn son literally showed up at my front door. And if you guys hang around long enough today, you'll actually meet him. So he's been living with me now for the last 3 years. This is another pass that I threw to myself and held the intention and the focus and the belief, because that part was important. And he's 25 now, and sometimes he works on my nerves, and sometimes I go, what was I asking for? And then I return to gratitude. I return to love. I return to peace. I return to thanksgiving, because it is literally a miracle. Because that could have been the case that showed up and said, I just wanted to see you. Now I know who you are. Thank you very much. I'm going on with my life. But we decided to have a relationship with one another, to work on something like meeting a stranger who is also yourself. And at times I watched this boy. The first time we met, we sat on a couch, and I was on one end, and he was on the other end. And I was sitting like this, and as I looked over, he was mirroring exactly what I was doing on the other side. And then he told me he wanted to be an actor. And then he told me he wanted to be an artist. All things that I was doing when I was his age. So I just stood in more and more and more gratitude. Getting back to the Martin Luther King, at some point, a couple times I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. It was really scary for me. I would do these Martin Luther King speeches, and I would meet people who knew Martin Luther King or who had marched with him. And the one incident is there's a woman who was about 84 years old, and I'm in a large black church in South Central LA, and this woman is on the back pew, as in usher is what she would describe herself as. And when I was done, she got up and she walked down the center aisle with tears streaming down her face, and she was screaming, "He's not dead. He's not dead." And I go, "Lady, he is." He really is. It was so intimidating to me at the time that I said, I can't do this anymore, because people are being affected in a way that I could not have imagined. I thought, I'm born in 1965. King dies in 1968. I vaguely remember my parents crying in the living room at the loss of this great man. And growing up as children, we were afraid of Martin Luther King. He was such a monumental figure that if you even brought him up to your grandparents, they would start to cry. And they would tell you that you are never to speak ill of this man. They would tell you that he had such an impact on the entire world that you are to pay homage and to pay respect. And so as kids, without knowing all the details, we would sit in the bathroom and do what they used to call the Bloody Mary trick. They would say if you would turn off all the lights and light one candle or no candles and say Bloody Mary, she's going to appear in the mirror. Then they said if you do this for Martin Luther King, he will appear. Well, I had this experience, and Martin Luther King appeared, and it scared the you know what. Later, I began to think about that experience, and I began to be open to allowing this spiritual energy to come through me. And all I can tell you is that transformation in one lifetime for any individual or for the planet is possible, because I'm living proof. I'm not telling you something I guess or that I read about or that I heard about somewhere. I'm talking about the experience that I had that is my life. So now, most of the people that know me will describe me as one of the most peaceful persons that they have ever met. Sometimes we go into environments and there's a lot of chaos that exists in the environment. And when I walk in, I'm breathing, I'm present, I'm available, and I can feel that impact permeate on a room. That's my assistant, Samantha, in the back, who's been so kind to come all the way from Australia as a writer, in essence, at this point in her life, just to be of service to me, just to facilitate the ability for me to go all over and speak to audiences. And so by now, to capsulize, on a regular basis, I visit schools, I visit churches, I visit homeless shelters, I visit prisons, I visit psychiatric wards, hospitals, any place people want to hear this stuff, because there's no way that I thought all these years later anybody would even be interested. But by now, with all of the work that I've done, I'm so grateful to be able to share this work as often as I can. This last year, and I know I'm babbling a bit, but you guys are getting stuff straight from the heart. This last year, two things happened. One, I decided it was really important to collaborate with other artists. So I began working with all kinds of artists, with tap dancers, with saxophone players, with belly dancers, with rappers, with singer-songwriters. And I thought, how does this mesh? How does this go together? That wasn't my business, the how. My business was to say yes and to be available to Pure Spirit, and consistently, things that I never thought would have gone together have come together to create the upliftment of Pure Spirit. I took a tap dancer with me to an elementary school with 700 kids, and we were outside on the playground. And those kids were absolutely spellbound with nothing but the words of Martin Luther King and a tap dancer who occasionally would go. My son, and again, if you stick around today, you'll get a chance to meet him. I said, you want to be an artist? You want to be an actor? I'm working with all these incredible artists. What would you like to do? He said, I saw a speed painting demonstration on opera. And I said, what in the world is speed painting? He said, well, you start with a blank canvas, and in a few minutes, you have a completed image. So I began taking him out with me, and I will go and do a Martin Luther King speech, and it takes him about 8 to 12 minutes. By the time I'm done with the speech, he has created an image of Martin Luther King, and he's a very good and talented artist that we then leave wherever we go. So we'll leave it at churches, at schools, at prisons, sort of our own little Johnny Appleseed. And when the people there go back and see that image, they remember hearing those words. They remember having that experience. So what's going to happen here this afternoon is a unique brand of this work that I do. Usually I take one, we call them peace players, the folks that go out with me. Now we've got about 9. And I finally put together a show called What Do You Dream Of? And it deals with speeches, some of which you've heard from Martin Luther King, and some of which I can promise you you have not heard. And throughout the course of the show, we explore these speeches, and we allow these peace players to offer their enhancement, if you will. So today, there's a belly dancer, there's the speed painter, there's a group of world artists called the Sound Shrine. They play a didgeridoo and a harmonium and a flute and a Native American drum. There's a 12-year-old rapper who wrote for me a song called MLK, Save the Day. There's a 21-year-old vocalist who wrote for me a song called Dare to Dream. So what the show really is, it challenges audience members in terms of what their own dream is. And it doesn't matter how old you are, so it's available for kids or for old people. In my opinion, it's never too late to get started. It's never too late to pursue your dream. I just want to be an impetus to ask people, what do you dream of? What do you want? What is trying to divinely express itself through, in, as, and around your life? I can assure you, by the time the show's over, and it only lasts about an hour, and there's no intermission, you will be touched, you will be moved, you will be impacted in a unique and different way. And he'll be here to do a couple of paintings. He'll do several paintings throughout the show. By the time we're done, there's going to be an image of Martin Luther King that we will leave Reverend Danielle, that she can do with what she will, but will be hers for time and all eternity, in essence. I know that's a lot, but that's how I come to be. This year we got a chance to go to Atlanta on April 4th, which is the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and become ambassadors for what's known as the Season for Nonviolence. So we literally take brochures and posters and images and ideas of how people can have more peace in their lives. And the Season for Nonviolence goes from January 29 until, which is when Gandhi was killed, until April 4th when Martin Luther King passes. And during that